Welcome back to part 2 of Marketing and Minimising Vacancy. We're continuing on from last week. Thank you to those who joined us last week with the initial information on this subject. This week we're going to be touching on more when we're getting to the point of feedback from the marketing and when's a good time to be looking at reviewing rents, and also when's a good time to actually stop marketing the property. Is it once we've actually secured an application, or is it at the point where we've signed a lease and we have the tenancy secure? So we'll be covering off on that information in this session. It's interesting, isn't it, that when I first started in real estate, we used to rent properties by advertising a one-liner in the newspaper. So we would, have a section of the newspaper called To Let, and you would literally have a property and an address. And the interesting part of that is that we still rented properties. So I think whilst, so many things have changed, at the end of the day, it will still come down to whether or not the property meets market conditions, the location, the presentation. So I think going back to those core points, yes, it's great to have all these additional marketing tools, and we definitely do need them because that's where people go to find property. And I think we're a little bit lazy now too. We want to see everything online before we actually walk out our front door and go and do an inspection of a property. So it's certainly more convenient for renters and buyers and sellers to have that online option. So having your major portals, realestate.com is probably one of the largest portals in, I would say, Australia, where most people go and search for rental and sale properties. Domain is another, obviously major, and there are a few other smaller players. I would probably avoid social media. I think people are drowned a little bit with properties on social media. I don't feel like that's a great platform at the moment for advertising properties. I know a lot of private owners are going down the track of advertising on the free sites, such as one in particular, Gumtree. I'd be a little bit careful of advertising on those sites because they don't specialise in that kind of marketing, and you do tend to attract probably not the best type of tenants from advertising in those sectors. If you're working with an agency, generally they will have a database that they will have the opportunity to market to. So that's a great tool. I know in our business we quite often will secure tenants before we even commence advertising a property because we're already working with the people. If we're working with potential tenants, naturally we're going to keep in touch with those potential tenants and they'll sign up for our regular updates for properties we have coming available. But quite often our letting team will actually contact people that they've been working closely with as well and let them know about opportunities coming available. So if you're with an agency, then that should be what's happening in the background, is that they're working with people and matching people with homes. So that's the best case scenario, because obviously it's less work for the agency and having to advertise and show the property, but it's also obviously less costly for you, and you have a tenant secured straight away. I would say though, don't penalise your agent, both in sales and in property management. Don't penalise them for doing a good job. We quite often get asked the question when we find a tenant within our database that we've been working with, well, will you discount your fee for providing that particular tenancy? So please don't penalise your agent for being efficient and doing their job and working with potential buyers and potential tenants, because that's essentially why you've gone to them to do that job for you. And of course, they've minimised the time that the property's been vacant, therefore it's already saved you money. So that's a little point from a real estate agent / property manager. The next point is a really interesting one. So asking rent so the rent that you're wanting to achieve versus the annual return. And this is a discussion I have with a lot of new clients that we work with, is that we really need to sit down and talk about the long-term strategy of this investment property, because our aim as property managers is to make sure that our clients receive as close to 52 weeks rent annually as possible, because we know that every week that the property is vacant is actually costing our clients 2% of their annual return. So we have to have these discussions because we need to decide whether or not we're going to go out at 110% of the market and try and get that lovely figure that you're hoping to achieve, or whether or not we should be sitting at about 95% of what we know we can achieve in order to speed up that process and minimise the vacancy time. Because when you actually sit down and do the maths, that's a much smarter way to obviously achieve a higher return on your investment property. So I've actually done some numbers, and I think my friend Richard here will pop up a slide very shortly. And he'll show you these figures that I've put together, which are very, very simple maths. And this is just one example of what I'm talking about here. So considering the big picture, at 51 weeks rent, $300 per week is $15,300 annual income. In comparison to 46 weeks rent, at $320 a week is $14,720. So as a result, we've had $580 loss in that particular financial year. The other thing to consider here also, if you're dealing with a managing agent looking after your property and you have rented the property for a 12-month period, if your rent is set too high, quite often your tenants are going to be constantly looking around for something cheaper and better. So leading up to the expiry of their tenancy, they might be shopping around to find something that might be better value. So by keeping your rent at about 95% constantly of market value, you'll avoid that changeover of tenancy. Once again, you won't have the vacancy in between every tenancy, but also consider the costs of reletting, because quite often if you are dealing with a managing agent, you've got the vacancy, you've also got anywhere up to 2.5 weeks rent in costs to relet the property. So you could be 6 weeks rent out of pocket just because you're trying to squeeze that extra $10 or $20 per week out of the property. So really consider the big picture and do your numbers over a long period of time, because this is a long game. It's investing in property is not a short game, so do consider that long-term big picture. Finally, I just wanted to touch on the process of once you've actually secured a tenant. And when I say secured, you've approved a potential applicant. A lot of owners and property agents make the mistake of, once you've actually approved an applicant, you're stopping the marketing and you believe you've secured a tenancy. My advice there is that you haven't secured a tenancy until you have a signed tenancy agreement and a deposit. So that's either the first 2 weeks rent in advance or the bond paid through to the account. My suggestion would be that you do not stop advertising the property until such time as you have secured that tenancy. So that would be my advice. Finally, next week we'll be talking on risk management, and we'll be touching on the different elements around making sure that you're covering off on all of the risks and how you can prepare for the go-wrongs with having a tenant in your property. So we'll be talking about insurance, we'll be talking about how we prepare the property for rent with condition reports and what we need to make sure that we're documenting prior to a tenant moving into a property. So that'll be next week's subject, and I hope to see you there.